Hope you're doing great. Pardon the delay. Pardon being late this morning. It's a great day to stack sats. Good morning, indeed, Double B. As you notice, I'm not in my normal location this morning. We are traveling back to the farm today. So setup was a little slower this morning. So thanks for sticking around and thanks for your patience. I really appreciate it. I get stressed when I'm a little late. Good morning, warriors of the sun, protectors of light and Bitcoin. We love it. Good morning, all. Have to ask, how did you come up with the name Count BTC, referring to nobility or arithmetic? Both. I wanted to absorb the idea of a sovereign, and in my story, the Satoshi wedding murders, I predict counts are going to be like a major sovereign thing, simply because they count Bitcoin. That's it. And it also comes a little bit from the psychology behind what we talk about here a little bit, the breakup, right? That's why we call it a psychological. We're in a relationship with money, talking about psychological commodities. The US dollar is a psychological commodity. Bitcoin is a psychological commodity. So being able to count is a little bit like integrating your shadow, loosely. That's how I deal with it, right? So we're talking a little bit about Jungian psychology here, and that's why counting Bitcoin is important. You can count it. That's its major thing. Good morning, all. Sean recommends. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. I'm going to go real quick. Where do I sats? What's up, my man? Christine, we love that you made it. Good morning. Thanks for your patience. So much Moscow time. We're going to be Moscow timing big time today. Good morning, y'all. CK in the house. How do we get more Bitcoiners watching the breakup? Yeah, we always want more. We want more. Everyone watches the breakup at the time they deserve. All right, let's do it. I got some. Well, let's just first acknowledge we got some sun, right, coming off the mirror back there, right? Let me just tell you right now, Bitcoin's running without any trouble. Let's have a coffee. Talk about what's new. So again, thanks for your patience. We were a little different when it's your first show, and I've been here for a few days at a wedding and things like that, right? But boy, oh boy, do we have some good Moscow time today. Today, I almost could have done a complete show on Moscow time. There's so much Moscow time today. It's unreal. So this one's pretty good. This comes from CBS News. Yeah, CBS News. And they were talking about the flooding in New York, right? So they asked the New York City has a climate chief, right? I don't know if they have a refugee sanctuary city relief system, but they do have a climate chief relief system, just so you know. And their quote about all the trouble that we just had in New York was, "We can't rebuild every sewer. It would cost $100 billion. We'd have to tear up every street in New York," he said. So instead, their goal is to dedicate 100% of their energy to decarbonizing New York City to get global warming under control. So sewers, no big deal. Sewers too complicated. Changing the atmosphere of the planet, no big deal. That's the preferred option, according to the climate czar of New York City. Sewers, sky, atmosphere, let's do it. Less complicated, he says, right? That's how we're going to get it under control, right? So that's what they're going for. This one's pretty good. This is in San Francisco. They've put up, because everyone's really concerned about the safety of the drugs and which kind of drugs people can use and how they get access to drugs. Like, these are the real questions of San Francisco, right? So what they did was they created a RV park so people could just bring their RVs there, because that sort of like solves the homeless trouble, right? But there's a little bit of a cost, right, to parking these RVs, and someone added it up. And they said a safe RV parking site in San Francisco costs $140,000 annually for each spot, right? So $140,000 for each spot where they park an RV. And so they finally looked into the numbers, and the supervisors recommend extending it. It's good investment, good use of money. This one's pretty good. This is from NBC News, right? So, how ex-Confederates spread racist attitudes far and wide after the Civil War. It's really good. Back to the batteries and the economics question for a second, right? So, a new $4 billion Panasonic electric vehicle battery factory in Kansas requires so much power that the facility will need its own coal power plant to run. Sounds cool. This one's really good. So in Canada, we're going to be talking about Canada today, obviously, right? Canada's always in the running for stupidest shit a country can do. So now this is Hamilton. You can think of Hamilton like Pittsburgh, I guess. We call them both Steel Town, right? So Hamilton is Steel Town. And it looks like there was a little disturbance yesterday. So the police wanted to let everyone know, right, that they'll be flying their drones in this neighborhood. And the reason is there was a potential unsanctioned mass gathering in Canada, a potential unsanctioned mass gathering. Get the drones in the sky, guys. No more a potential unsanctioned gatherings. This one's pretty good. We're going to be talking about the fire alarm today. Someone didn't want to vote in Congress, so they pulled the fire alarm, probably drunk or high or something, right? To think that was a good idea. But now he has a way to deal with it. And he says that it's actually the Nazi Republicans, right? So Bowman, the guy who pulled the fire alarm, their camp slams the Nazi Republicans for the fire alarm flap. So Sangar and Getty said, I privately joked that Bowman would just have to use raising the alarm was about racism and homophobia and sexism in his defense, and Dems would back him. And now he's doing it, right? So Sangar predicted it. We had I've talked many times about which Moscow Times segment we might have to put in the Louvre or the Smithsonian or some kind of museum situation, right? The fakest news we can find. CNN really went out of its way yesterday, and everyone was picking up on it. Marty Bent picked up on it. Everyone was picking up on it. But they were talking about the spending bills that the U.S. was passing over the weekend and all this money. And so the journalist said, enough is enough, right? She said, enough is enough. First and foremost, the vast majority of the money is going to American jobs, right? She says, oh, all these companies that build weapons, they're going to get paid the shells and the mortars. Lockheed Martin, she said, Raytheon, right? She was really happy. All these people getting money. Marty said in the councils, Marty points out that first, he points out that Dwight warned us about this, right? In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. So she thinks it's just like, don't worry about the money. The money is just going to regular Americans, everyone. Don't worry about the bombs. Regular Americans, right? It's just regular Americans. Oh, this is great. So the Nobel Prize was handed out this weekend. The Nobel Prize in Science or Medicine or whatever, and it went to the so-called inventors because not everyone agrees. I guess Robert Malone and a few others disagree that the inventors of the mRNA vaccine were these two people, right? So they go, they get the award, right? So they go to Norway to accept their medicine award, their Nobel Prize for inventing the mRNA vaccines. And they get a photo op there, and so they're in their masks. Right? So the inventors of the vaccine, right? The inventors of the vaccine don't trust their own innovation and rely on pseudoscience, a mask, to stay safe while they accept the reward for inventing the vaccine. So good for them. Really great. Pope Francis claims that there's no migrant emergency in Europe, right? The problem is individualism, he said, right? No migrant emergency. The problem is individualism, okay? So he got it. Scientific American, right? Government shutdown could delay climate action. EPA rules on clean cars, power plants, and methane could face delays if there is a federal government shutdown because of budget turmoil in Congress. Climate shutdown. It's going to happen. Remember when they said last winter, no one's coming after your propane stove. No one's coming after any of that, right? Well, turns out Biden administration issues restrictions on gas furnaces and latest war on appliances, right? So that happened. Climate change, more climate change. This is, I don't want to laugh. Okay, how about this? I'm going to say it right now. I'm not going to laugh at this because I'm going to be a good person. Okay, this is not funny. If you're out there laughing at the following Moscow Time thing, that's on you. Okay, it's not me. You're gonna model me, and I'm not gonna laugh at all. All right. So I don't want to hear anyone laugh out there because this is not funny. All right, it's not funny. There's a journalist in Philadelphia, right? And the journalist in Philadelphia, he was really into vaccines. He was really against Trump and really was the past few days laughing at Scott Adams because Scott Adams predicted that people would be dead within a year of Joe Biden being elected back in 2020. He said Republicans would be hunted, right? So this guy, Josh Kruger is his name, right? He spent the weekend picking up Scott's prediction and saying, look at how stupid Scott Adams is, right? Nostradamus, he called him. The Dilbert dude is Nostradamus. Look at his prediction from 2020. He goes, wow, eerie, right? He says, wow, eerie. Well, it turns out he was fatally shot in his own home this weekend in Philadelphia. The same weekend he was saying that Scott Adams is an idiot for predicting violence. And so this is the part that's not funny. Okay, this is not funny. Michael Malice writes about it. He goes, we live in a simulation because of the coincidence of this guy picking on Scott Adams' quote about you'll be dead in a year. And then he's gone, right? Scott says he has an alibi, by the way. Scott has an alibi. But here's what Michael Malice said. He goes, we live in a simulation. Well, except for Josh. Pretty good. It's not funny. I don't want to hear anyone laughing, right? I don't want to hear anyone laughing about the simulation joke. It's not funny. Okay? Not at all. Sorry, this one was out of order. But to go back to that CNN girl, this was the quote I really wanted. I read the Marty Bent one instead. But this is Erin Burnett talking a little bit more about how the spending bill is going to regular Americans. It's not going to Ukrainians, right? So she adds that the vast majority of the money is going to American companies and jobs, right? Because those are the people that are making the tanks and the ammo and everything else, right? That's what she said. And now these ones are really great, right? These ones are really great. This is all back to Canada and the Nazis, right? The Nazi salute they gave last week in Parliament, right? They saluted a Nazi. Politico is letting us know that fighting against the USSR didn't necessarily make you a Nazi, okay? It didn't really. Canada's Hunka scandal is a demonstration of how, when history is complicated, it can be a gift to propagandists who exploit the appeal of simplicity, right? That's what they're saying here. So what we heard is that history is complicated. If you read the article, it's complicated, right? So let's just get this straight, right? Trump is a Nazi, Brexit people were Nazis, anti-vaxxers were Nazi, Putin is a Nazi, the Canadian truckers are Nazis, right? But you know who isn't Nazis? Do you know who isn't? Right? The Waffen SS. No, come on, it's complicated. It's complicated. Okay, it's complicated. Complicated. This one's pretty good too. A judge at the Trump civil trial, right, implores the media to stop saying that he valued Mar-a-Lago at $18 million. Not a good look, they're saying. Not a good look, right? All right, what do we got here? Sheridan Noster. There we go. All right. Shot 7 times, yeah. 7 times. It's not funny. It's not funny, guys. Don't laugh. Don't laugh. It's not funny. Okay? We live in a simulation, except for Josh. Well, except for Josh. Michael Malice, you son of a bitch. Funny stuff. Funny stuff. All right. So, where's all this stuff? So we got. How do these things not come in here? Did I not spin them in? Anyway, let me see what's up. So today our theme is, of course, none of these came in. Huh. What the fuck happened? All right, we can go off this. Never an easy setup sometimes when you switch. All right. So today's theme comes back to this fire alarm, right? The fire alarm that was raised. This is another good one. Ezra Levant, right? So Ezra, I'll get into the fire alarm in a second, but the Nazis, this is from CBC. So they're saying that that the family is in hiding, right? So the family's in hiding. The Hunka family is in hiding because everyone's upset that they're Nazis and that the Canadian government saluted them. So they're saying, it's not really our fault. And Ezra Levant, who I'm going to read something else from him in a second, says the following. The family is hiding here in North Bay, Bonifant said. I'm sure they're afraid to show their faces. And Ezra says, check if they're hiding in the attic. That's where Hunka would have looked. That's where he'd have looked. It's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, as I told you, a lot of Moscow time today. Lots of Moscow. We could have gone on. There was so much content for Moscow time that we could have done the whole thing on Moscow time this morning. But instead, we have a theme, which is ringing the Fiat fire alarm. And my theory is basically this: everyone asking about this guy ringing the fire alarm, and what does it mean? So he could have just been drunk, right? Because it's a bad idea any way you cut it, and only a drunk or high person probably could have thought that was a good idea, right? Like if you know some of your friends and they do crazy stuff and none of it makes sense, and you say, "Why'd you do that?" Right? They say, "I'm inebriated." It makes sense after. So that could have been it. But in the end, what I think it is, what I really do believe it is, with drugs included or whatever, is that I think we really are dealing with the end of the systems of control that can even perpetuate and do these things. This is all they have left. It's like Joe Biden and his ability to convince you of stuff, Janet Yellen and her ability to convince people to buy US T-bills, right? This is the plan. They're not sending us their best, right? We got a guy who is borderline mentally handicapped, who thinks it's a good idea to prevent a vote by pulling a fire alarm. And his excuse is, right, "Oh, I didn't know," and da 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 da. And of course, the media is running cover for him, right? So of course that's happening. But when I sit and think about it, when I stop and people continuously ask what can happen next and how much worse can things get, I think there isn't necessarily a limit to that, right? We've seen COVID. We've seen the extent to which people would go, to manipulate an election, to gaslight, to lie, to cheat, to steal. It looks extensive, right? It doesn't look like there's a limit, but still, it requires competent people in order to enact, right? You need people who can do things. And when I think of this fire alarm story, again, I come up to the realization that we're up against not impressive people, like really not impressive people, right? And it looks like the sum total of the plan is going to be things like what Trudeau tried to pull this weekend. So I don't know if you guys saw in Canada. And again, right, I don't think there's any question any longer. I don't think there was a debate for a little while about who the stupidest people in the world are, right? Who are the dumbest people in the world? It's got to be Canadians, guys. It just has to be, right? It just has to be. There's no other country this dumb actually thinking about the following as a real system. So what happened is in Canada, we have something called the CRTC. It's the Radio and Telecommunications Commission. It's like a bureaucracy from the 1970s. And they've never had any jurisdiction on the internet. It's been a big problem for them, right? They've only been able to do over-the-air broadcast television and radio. And that's about it. And they've had a lot of frustration about not being able to get involved in the internet for a long time. But it turns out they got their wish. And Ezra brought most of the news to us this weekend, and it kind of went viral. So this is what happened. In Canada, there's now a need or requirement for podcasters, broadcasters, almost anyone out there to register with the government, register with this CRTC thing. We've got Michael Schellenberger, who kind of broke it all down. He says, when Trudeau's Liberal Party leaders said they would only regulate big tech social media platforms, they lied. They are now demanding that independent news media and even podcasters register to be regulated. Canada's crackdown comes as the EU and UN WEF demand even more censorship. So it was an article written yesterday by Schellenberger saying, for months, representatives of the government said they were only going to do big tech social media platforms, but it was a lie. They would impact independent news outlets or podcasters. And here they come and say, I think we brought the necessary changes to the bill to reassure them and to make sure that platforms are in and users are out, the minister said. As a result, the legislation passed. But it turns out that the government is, in fact, going to regulate content providers, not just big tech social media firms. The government regulator, the CRTC, Canadian Radio Telecommunications Commission, announced on Friday that it would require registration by independent content producers, including online news companies and individuals that host podcasts on their own websites. The CRTC says that the law only covers media companies with 10 million or more per year in revenue, and that the information it is demanding is minimal. We will be able to continue to listen and watch the content of your choice. You will be able to continue to listen and watch the content of your choice, the government stresses. Our goal is to better support Canadian and Indigenous content and ensure it is available. But notes Canadian legal analyst Michael Geist, who I've worked with before. The takeaway from the decision is obvious. Registration is the first step towards regulation. In fact, the rationale for the CRTC to include many of the services is that without such information, it can't regulate in the future. So their whole point here is to get this stuff regulated. So let me just tell you, I'm obviously not going to be registering with the CRTC. I had a premonition that Canada was going down the tubes long time ago. So I've extricated myself from most shenanigans in Canada. I can't really be touched by the government here. I think, they're probably going to find some ridiculous way. But so far so good, right? I've sort of pulled everything of my life out of this country years before any of the trouble, sort of suspecting that they weren't going to let anyone who was a little bit prolific and useful and effective during the Harper years to just live their life. So especially if they turned around and became a Bitcoiner that did okay in the Bitcoin world, right? So from there, my sense is that Canada is just going to have to lose all of this talent. We had Stacey from the Max and Stacey situation down in El Salvador, inviting all the Canadian podcasters there. I think the smarter ones have already got the hint, right? Viva Fry already had to relocate after the truckers because he knew he was targeted. So Viva Fry now is spending most of his time in the United States. And I would say he's one of the bigger podcasters. The other ones, I'm not sure what people are going to do. I think some people are going to have to make choices about whether or not they stay in Canada. But it looks like, for now anyway, Canada is firmly in the shitter and a useless place to consider and go and try to live your professional life. It's still a great place to visit. People are nice, but bring your Bitcoin. Don't rely on the banks here. You might lose it all. So that's what's going on with Canada. But it's not much better in the United States, of course. Well, so Elon even calls the situation in Canada what we all can see, that basically you're dealing with Trudeau, who just won't have any opposition. And I continue to say, the biggest red flag I see, is what I see in the United States as well, right? That, for example, Biden isn't even seemingly panicked about his electoral prospects. From when I look at Biden these days, right, he's got four potential areas where he can be impeached. You had Jonathan Turley, who I think is known for calling balls and strikes, right? A lot of MAGA people hate Jonathan Turley because he was always waffling on his support of Trump and things like that. But he's a lawyer, and he comes out and says straight up, Biden has four legitimate places where he can be absolutely impeached and it looks criminal, without having the benefit of a trial and innocent until proven guilty, et cetera, et cetera. He says there's four where he says that would be real troubles for Biden. You take Trudeau, for example. I haven't met a real Trudeau supporter in the wild in Canada in a long time. And it would be the same. Now, you meet brain dead people who you can assume would be Trudeau supporters. That's definitely possible. The same in the United States. You meet people who are brain dead and probably would vote for Biden, but they're not like Biden supporters, right? They're not out there saying like, I love Joe Biden, he's doing a great job, and all these things. So you don't have that in Canada, really, that I can see, right? That I can see. Now, I bet you they're out there. I've just never met one. Now, that's probably on me, right? I probably just don't know enough mentally handicapped people, and that's why I don't know these folks. So I think they're out there, but are they out there in numbers enough to win an election, right? Like a legit election? I don't think so. Because eventually you'd come across one, just like in 2020, I never met a Biden, like an actual Biden supporter who was like, yeah, I love Joe Biden. I met people who hated Trump, right? So I can still believe that Biden could get 80 million whatever votes. I can believe it because of the Trump hatred. So it makes sense. And And in Canada, you had a similar situation with the guy I used to work for, who's a Bitcoiner now, right? Stephen Harper. He was the prime minister in the last government. So there was a huge amount of hatred for him, just like there was for Trump. They called him a Nazi. It was all the same things, right? Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. So that's how I sort of could see the blueprint for the Trump situation coming, which is why I loved Trump's abrasiveness and his irreverence and his combativeness, because I knew they would be calling you a Nazi no matter what, right? No matter what. Unless you were an actual Nazi and you got applauded by that faction, then they would just ignore it, right? It was complicated. So when I saw this, situation happening, and you start sort of making your predictions and all that, when I see them not worried, right? When I see Biden just like, yeah, I'm going to win, right? Well, what does it make me think is that the election systems don't work, that you don't have to worry about your popular support because it doesn't really matter, right? There's other ways to win. Remember, Trudeau won last time in a very similar way to Biden. He won every single battleground he needed to win in order to get him over the line. Trudeau lost the popular vote by a lot, like by I think the most anyone's ever lost the popular vote. Now, mathematically, it still makes sense for him to win because we've got 4 parties in Canada, 5 parties, I guess, 6 parties maybe. Depends on how official they are by total vote get. But he only got 30-something% of the total vote, but it happened to be distributed in the same way Biden was distributed. He won the exact races he needed to win. Wisconsin, in the case of Biden, Pennsylvania, there was a few that he had to win, right? And in the case of Trudeau, it was the same. He just happened to win exactly the ones he needed to win. Now, I don't know if it's a scam, right? I don't. It looks like it, but when I see them not even worried about the next election, that more or less confirms to me anyway that we're dealing with a situation we can't really see. Something is invisible when it comes to the election governance, which is why I've been telling Bitcoiners to pick fights with the election bodies to begin with. Bitcoiners need to get in the game when it comes to election conversations, because as I've said many times, Bitcoiners, through our debate about scaling and our debates about engineering the Bitcoin system, understand what it takes to build a system and understand what the trade-offs are in order to have something that you can trust to fulfill a vital role like money, right? So because Bitcoiners have understood for a long time that it's a trade-off between credibility and convenience, right? So convenience to vote would be the vote anytime you want with a mail-in ballot and a paper ballot, versus credibility, which is you can only vote here at this time, and every vote is counted and is harder to influence because it's a one-day vote situation, which is why you get folks like Vivek Ramaswamy, who is arguing hard for the number one thing he can do in his candidacy is to change the election system, make a vote day in America a holiday, only one-day voting, like in Israel, right? Israel does it that way. Israel does one-day voting. Every party has witnesses. Everyone gets one place to vote in. Nothing moves from that location, and that's it, right? So very credible, but very not convenient, very difficult. You got to wait in line. You got to go the day. You can't go on another day. If you get sick that day, you can't go. If you break your leg that day, you can't go. No do-overs. No vote again later. Nothing like that, right? So Canada was way ahead on this mail-in ballot shit, right? And I would even say it was not the Liberals who invented it. I think it was the Conservatives who were way ahead on ballot harvesting and all that stuff. So this isn't like a partisan thing. That's why you don't see the problem getting solved. Every party's been on it, right? The Georgia guys that are causing all this trouble for Trump, they had the Democrats saying for years, Stacey Abrams, that it was a scam, Was she wrong? Probably not. Probably not, right? The only difference was treatment. She was allowed to go on and complain about it for years and not called a coup insurrectionist, whereas everyone else who said the same thing as her were called coup insurrectionists, right? So not exactly the same situation. But again, going back to Bitcoiners joining in this voting debate conversation, there isn't a right answer. We just know what the costs are, the cost benefit is. We know what the trade-offs are. And that's enough to have the conversation for real and not be caught in these fake binaries of, oh, it's people's right to vote whenever the hell they want, right? Well, yeah, maybe that's true, but there's a trade-off to those systems, and Bitcoiners understand that better than anyone and can add to it. But here's where things, I think anyway, are where they're sort of tied together, and we can relate it to this, fiat fire alarm and the end of fiat and all that stuff. Because remember this, the fiat system it's in the words, right? So just as I said, Bitcoiners understand how the network propagates. It's a peer-to-peer network. The nodes propagate the network. There's a trade-off if you would change that in any way, if you would change how the system comes to an agreement, if you would alter the system for performance, for example, which has always been our argument, right? The convenience of it, the argument of performance-based scaling of Bitcoin, right? And why it's been resisted is because we've preferred credibility, and credibility being the number one resource we can extract from the Bitcoin network, right? We can all agree on there's something called time. And if we now have a record of what happened when, that's very, very valuable and should be the selected for, right? The options that increase this security. I think most Bitcoiners are interested in making sure that credibility of the network is supported by intellectual and energetic, let's call it, how would I say it, support, basically Bitcoiners opt for and optimize for that side of the equation, right? Now, I don't know what the actual right balance is in elections, but this trade-off is what people need to talk about. Now, in the case of fiat, right? In the case of fiat, the nodes themselves are just words. They're people who say words, and in the same way that Bitcoin has nodes that propagate things, and we can see the bits, it's in the words, right? Bitcoin and the network itself and the node operators themselves use the language of Bitcoin in order to communicate and run the protocol. In the case of fiat, it is just institutions and words, and the word fiat has everything you need to know about the system. It is declarations, right? Fiat means to declare, and so the words that are spoken are a big part of what's going on. Which is why it's interesting. Even Biden this weekend, they carted him out, and he says people go on the internet. He was complaining about Twitter, right? People go on the internet, they don't know what's true anymore, right? Well, that's true. People go on the internet and they don't know what's true, mostly because there's so many psyops out there and so much lying out there that it's impossible to tell. The CRTC thing in Canada is a perfect point, right? They don't want any dissenting point of view. They don't want any of that stuff. Now, just this weekend, Elon Musk also said fiat is a scam, right? He called fiat currency a scam. And when you think about all of these things working together in concert, right? Just look at what happened this weekend with Trump and Letitia James and this trial he's got today, right? Just so you can see how incredulous the system has become, incredulous, right? And why this is an important fact, right? Why it's an important fact. So this is the lady. Now we've seen, so this wouldn't have happened had we not had more independent media. Someone did another one of these compilation videos of Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, basically just saying she has a personal vendetta against Trump. I'm going to get him. I'm going to investigate everything and all these things. So now she went and got him. But because Americans are also very stupid, like Canadians, right? They don't really know and can't really tell what's going on most of the time because they're so financially illiterate. They're a bit lost in this case, right? But here's what you need to know. Trump, they're saying, deflated or lied about, increased the value of his properties, right? Lied about it, and they brought them down. That's why the judge was saying, only $18 million, right? Stop talking about it. Some people say 300, 400, 500 million. We're talking about Mar-a-Lago. But here's what they think, right? They're selling a story where the banks, right? This is what they're trying to tell you. The bank. Now, I don't know the details of any of this. I know zero details. My daughter. I know zero details of the actual case against Donald Trump in Florida. In New York. I only know what the media is trying to tell you, right? I know zero details other than this money thing about the valuation, but I know what the media is trying to tell you. So they're trying to say that the crime is this, that the banks believed Donald Trump about his increased valuation size, right? Oh, he lied, right? Well, do you think the bank believed him? Right? Of course not. Oh, 1 second. So the bank, of course, didn't believe what he said. There's no way that happened. And the insurance companies or anyone else who would listen to his lies, if Trump would say the building is worth $500 million, well, the insurance company's happy because it just means more premiums, right? That's all it means is more premiums. 1 second. Stupid phones. So it means more premiums, which means the insurance companies make more money. Right. So the crime here is that Trump paid more money to the insurance companies than he needed to. Right. But no one understands that. Right. So they're going to rely on this. But because we have more independent media now, you get these compilation videos. And you can actually start persuading people when you see the lies layered over time and one after the other and rapid fire in this way, right? We even saw the the I don't know if it was a kill shot, but yesterday you had Bill Maher, or on Friday, Bill Maher and what's his name again? He's losing his mind. Sam Harris. So this girl goes on to the Sam Harris show and does one of the most effective things you can do to men in particular, which is laugh at them, right? When a woman laughs at men about their intellectual opinions, there's almost nothing more devastating, right? Men cannot recover. So you got to see this. This Mary Catherine Ham goes on to the show with Sam Harris and Bill Maher and laughs at their Russia Trump collusion thing with Mueller and the Steele dossier. Now, Trump is now suing Christopher Steele, which is one of the great developments of the last 2 weeks or something. Something he should have done a long time ago. So you see her just smashing these people in the face, right? No, there was a lot in the Steele dossier. It was unprecedented, right? And she went out and said, like, well, you mean, yeah, unprecedented as in paid for by Hillary Clinton, paid for by Democrat operatives, peddled through the media for months and months. So you can just see how uncomfortable these guys are. And Sam Harris, again, I don't know if he's an alcoholic or something, but you can see he doesn't want to see what's happening. He just has pure cognitive dissonance right there in front of everyone, right? So so between the media, between the ability to propagate these lies, right? The ability to propagate these lies, we're in a situation where the Fiat network, it needs fire alarms. It needs people running the dumbest plans you can imagine in order to keep it going. And if it doesn't have these things to keep it going, it's going to crash, right? We're seeing it all over the world, right? We're seeing, this is from Prof. St. Onge, who will be with us next week in New York, talking about how the even the IMF, right? They produced a video on inflation and they're trying to share it around. They never even talk about money supply in the video, right? So how helpful is this going to be? Here's another one that he wrote about the fiscal death spiral and the Fed's magic money printers. And talking about the fourth turning as well. This is all Prof. St. Onge, talking about how we're sort of on the cusp right now of this change, right? You even look at the information laundering complex that has been used to dub things misinformation. Mike Benz, we've been talking about him for a while. Looks like he's got the number on these guys. Doesn't look like this stuff is going to be affected. You had Yoel Roth trying to run stuff on, now that he's gone from Twitter, trying to run interference against X on elections, and says Twitter has slammed the door shut on these collaborations to the detriment of both the company and the security of global elections, right? But no one is paying attention to this guy anymore, right? Mike Benz says, laugh my ass off. The guy parked at a century-old CIA cutout run for the past 7 years, but the now head of the CIA is whining about X not bending over and opening its butt cheeks for a different CIA cutout in Australia, right? Yoel Roth belongs to the blob. So I probably got Yoel Roth wrong. Let me just say that, right? I said Yoel Roth was just stupid, before, right? I said he was just low IQ moron. Doesn't look like that, right? Now I stand corrected according to Mike Ben's investigations. It looks like he is a little more duplicitous than a low IQ moron. So there he is. But then even, take this one, for example. You had Michael Lewis this weekend, right? Michael Lewis went on 60 Minutes, the fakest news show you can find. And he goes out there trying to say that Sam Bankman-Fried was a good guy and that his business would still be running and it was a profitable business, right? So, look, the truth is, it was never a real business. He was doing a thing he wasn't allowed to do, which is fractional reserve lending, taking deposits of customers and shipping them all around. For Michael Lewis to not know that, right, has to be a lie. He's not an idiot. So Nick Carter broke down his impressions of Michael Lewis, and I'll say they mirror many of my own. I got to spend time with Michael Lewis this year in Miami, and I cornered him about the CFTC elections, election prediction markets, and SBF's involvement in them. And I'm telling you, he had zero interest. Zero interest. He was not interested in the information. He was being polite, but I could tell it was causing him physical pain. Not because I was being annoying or anything like that. I snuck it in there, right? I could tell it was causing him physical pain, and it raised many alarm bells. Even in the first place, I stuck him on stage this year because he didn't want us asking about SBF. But I said, okay, I can live with that, but I'm going to put him on stage with Arthur Hayes, who doesn't care about whatever rules I sign, and he'll have no choice but to talk about SBF because Arthur has a vendetta, right? So I knew it was going to work. In the end, Michael Lewis ends up going on television he writes an article in the New York Times a few days before he comes on stage with us, talking about and pumping his new book on SBF. And I said, okay, all bets are off. Whatever contract I signed with you that said we couldn't ask questions about SBF is null and void because you've just let the world know you're doing the book. So I'm not breaking news anymore. And they said, oh, okay, we have to live with that, right? But I tried to get him destroyed on stage live, but he did it to himself on 60 Minutes. But it was my goal in Miami to have Arthur press him, and not melt him down live, but at least have him do what he did yesterday or 2 days ago on 60 Minutes, which is tip his hand to show what side of the equation he's on. Nick Carter broke this all down and said the following. Let me get Nick's stuff, which I think I have. Maybe I don't. My notes. Oh, there it is. Yeah. My notes really sucked today. So let me get this straight. In 2014, Michael Lewis publishes Flash Boys. So do you know that I heckled Michael Lewis in 2014 when he wrote Flash Boys? He was coming to Toronto to pump it. And I was saying, you're an idiot. You're not writing about Bitcoin. Why aren't you talking about these people? I didn't say you're an idiot, but I said, you're missing a big occasion. Like, let's chat. Maybe you don't know about Bitcoin. I'll teach you about Bitcoin. And maybe your next book will be about Bitcoin. As I wrote him about that. I tried to go to the show in order to corner him then about Bitcoin, but didn't work out. It was too big and blah, blah, blah. So this is what Nick Carter has found out. He says, Michael Lewis publishes Flash Boys, a book designed to promote IEX, that's International Exchange, the book panned by most people with knowledge of high-frequency trading, HFT. So Brad Katsuyama, the guy from IEX, went to the same university as me. He's a little bit older than me, but it's the same era and vintage. So I knew a lot. I went to college with the guy, right? He was older than me, but not by much. We were contemporaries. So FTX and IEX pre-partnership hold meetings with SEC aiming for a safe harbor U.S. operations. So Brad Katsuyama and FTX were going to join, right? FTX US announces investment in IEX. Deal is described as small and strategic, size not disclosed. It later emerges that the $270 million described as controlling stake in the FT reporting, right? Large stake with option to buy. Michael Lewis begins closely shadowing SBF in order to write, and this is June 2022, to write a hagiography, so a really nice thing about someone, right? Presumably similar in tone to Flash Boys, Lewis is invited to the Bahamas, Super Bowl, treated like a prince. Summer 2022, Gensler keeps meeting with IEF. FTX lobbies Congress hard. By last November, Michael Lewis has full access and visibility into SBF FTX Alameda on his account of his shill piece, completely fails to blow the whistle, raise any alarm, report any red flags. November 2022, FTX collapses. November 2022, Michael Lewis shopping movie rights. December, SBF arrested. December 2022, Michael meets FBS outside of his house, right? What I want to know, how in the hell did Michael Lewis notice nothing amiss during his 6-month tenure shadowing SBF? Is it just a coincidence Lewis wrote a shill piece for IEX and was writing one for FTX and then struck a cozy partnership? What was his role there? What kind of deal did FTX and Lewis strike? Was it the carbon copy of the IEX deal? Write a ludicrously one-sided favorable account? Did Lewis know crucial info about FTX's insolvency and conceal it in order to obtain access to SBF? What's clear, Michael Lewis isn't a neutral biographer or chronicler of events. He's a character in his own story. He's influencing outcomes, and he knows it. And he whiffed on calling the biggest financial fraud of a generation some journalist he is. Which is exactly true. It's exactly true. Remember, I was telling CoinDesk in September 2022, I was warning them, SBF is done. He's going to be destroyed. I didn't know about all the fraud. I said he's just going to be destroyed for other reasons, other reasons, right? Many of which we all know now and have come true. And by the way, one of the neatest things that I think I'll think of in my own personal life as we move on and history turns and changes and we move forward in the world is that my last order of business at CoinDesk, as I was being bought out and shuffled along, was to set up the editorial firewall between management and ownership and the journalists. Well, they've won a lot of awards for breaking the FTX SBF story, and amazingly, the parent company has been didn't work out well for them. So not what I wanted, right? That was not what I put in place, but the system held, right? CoinDesk was able to write articles without interference. That's why they're winning all these awards. So the reality here is the fiat network is really down to its last legs, right? The fire alarm situation is simply because the nodes are not operating as they once did. They're not perpetuating any form of credibility. We've got a laughable US justice system that won't stop indicting its ex-president. You've got the top level journalists in financial media, which we now know due to Mockingbird and everything we've understood about book publishing is a complete and total fraud. Now we have the Canadian government who's trying to move against podcasters. That ain't going to work. It's not going to work, right? I mean, it might work in Canada, but Canada is a shithole and anyone can leave Canada and go somewhere else. Now, I understand the argument. We might run into places, right? Indeed, I don't think we're at the worst of it. I think other countries are going to follow Canada. Canada's a kind of spearhead here. I don't think it's going to take much to convince the New Zealanders and the Australians to be like Canadians, right? They're, like I said, I've said it many times. If you were going to have a quiz show about the stupidest, least informed people in the world, like you did a show, like there was a quiz show in the world, and you brought Canadians, Americans, Australians, and New Zealanders together, you would find some pretty unaware people in those crowds. I just happen to believe that Canada would produce the Lionel Messi of misinformed people, right? The most amount of like emoji they can put in their bios, extra gender signifiers, right? That's the Canadian game, right? They're the best at it. So, but without the system propagating any degree of credibility, you end up in situations like, we've got Steve Bannon saying end the Fed, audit the Fed right now. That's happening now, right? So the spending bills in the United States that the fire alarm thing was related to as well, major problems for the fiat industrial complex. If you start looking at individual signing bills, really a big problem. So I don't think this is gonna go away. I think you are clearly now in a situation where it's one way or the other, and we'll see. I mean, people say often that, and I've been worried about it for a while, that Trump, maybe gets, Kennedy. I'm thinking more and more, and I made this prediction this summer. I don't think Biden makes it to Christmas. I think it's if I was in the position of keeping the Fiat thing going, right, the least suspicious mixing of the cards I could do right now would be the current president, if that's the way I was thinking, right? Because it's kind of believable. It's not messy, right? You can do it cleanly, and then you can start mixing things up, because he ain't going to be able to do it. I mean, there's just no way. So the good news is we got all kinds of stuff happening the next little while, and things are changing quick. Yeah. What do we got here? Legault and Trudeau both bought their last election. Money for all. People fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, he can do it again. It's mind-boggling that voting today isn't. It should be the number one national holiday. Tommy, you're so right about that. Yeah, you're so right about that. Yeah. Good morning, fam. Good morning. Good morning. No, he doesn't get Bitcoin at all. He's very confused. I spent time with him in Miami, as I said. He's not. They're not sending us their best. Gonna need that NPC book before Christmas. Yeah, it should come soon. Yesterday was about changing names to 2 post offices. Oh, is that so, Dan? I know what you're talking about. All right, team. I got to drive back to the United States today. I will be in Vermont tonight. So that's all I got for today, everyone. Pardon me for the slightly confused version of the show. We shall get back into our regular... We shall get back into our regular habit tomorrow. And then remember, there's no shows next week. I'll be in Amsterdam. The timing will be off. I'm busy. I guess it's like 1 or 2 that I would normally do this show PM over there in Europe. So I'm not going to be able to be free at that time to hit you at the 8 a.m. Eastern time the way I would normally do. So maybe I'll do a couple posts at different times or something like that, but we'll see. It's not going to be easy to be completely set up. And I'm not bringing my desktops or anything like that. All right, team, that's all I got. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Take it easy. Have a great day.